So I recently told somebody I would come on here and share a testimony. My 15-year-old daughter, she drowned when she was 2 years old. We were at my mother-in-law's birthday party, and the details, people love details, so I will just give the details. We were standing around giving my mother-in-law a present, and a couple minutes had passed by and we noticed Kylie was missing. And so we went and looked around the pool, we looked around the playground. It was like 9:30 at night, so it was pretty dark. My husband went and looked in the pool. He didn't see her. And my sister-in-law said she heard the Lord tell her to go look behind her brother. And when she got to the pool, she just screamed, "Oh my gosh, Morgan, she's in the pool." And I essentially jumped out of my flip-flops, ran around the gate. And as Jennifer pulled my daughter out of the pool, she had defecated on herself. She was purple. I knew in that moment she was gone. And I told Jennifer, I'm like, lay her down on the concrete, just put her down. My husband started to do CPR right away. And if you could even just imagine the amount of utter chaos taking place. I mean, people screaming everywhere. It was like time stopped. It was crazy. At the time I had a 7 or 8 month old baby. Her older sister was 3, or no, her older sister was 4 and my son was 5. And so in that moment, my husband was doing CPR. I walked away because I panicked, right? I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. And I stood there looking out into the distance, looking at the houses. And I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, all of these people are just sitting in their house watching TV, and my world just stopped. And I didn't know how to respond to that. And I was like, okay, I started to like plan. I don't know if this is like a trauma response, but I started to plan out her funeral, like what she was going to wear. We had just started potty training. I was like, I got to make sure I bury her with her panties and her favorite dinosaur t-shirt, with her blue Crocs and all of her pacifiers. Like, it's crazy how quickly your brain goes to that place. But, very soon after that, I snapped out of it, and I just found myself face first on the concrete. And I didn't even know what to say. I knew I was going to pray, but I didn't have the words. I wasn't crying. I wasn't screaming. I was just frozen, like absolutely frozen. And when I got face down on the concrete, I thought to myself, God, you have lost your son, and now I've lost my daughter. I know everything's going to be okay. And in that moment, I surrendered the loss of my daughter to the Father. And I accepted that I was going to be one of those parents. I was going to be the mom who was judged for letting her kid die. And I was ready to take whatever came my way. And I knew that God was going to sustain me every step of the way. At this point, several minutes had gone by. They sent me into the street to wait for the ambulance. And my brother-in-law at the time came and said, hey, she's breathing, she's awake. And at this time, like 5 minutes had gone by, maybe more. And I was thinking to myself, that's great, she's awake, but how brain dead is she, right? Because nobody can go that long without oxygen, especially a baby, and be perfectly fine. We get to the hospital, and just to give some information about my daughter Kylie, she at 2 years old was barely speaking. Like, she said a few simple one-word phrases like snack or mom or dad, but they were like in her own language, so only we knew what she was saying. So we get to the hospital and she's screaming. She's very angry. And it sounded like she was saying she wanted to go home, which was weird because we had never heard her say words before. So that night she went to sleep, and I slept in the little tiny crib with her in the hospital. She had no water on her lungs. And they didn't do any type of like brain scans or anything. So like, we still didn't know if she was going to be okay, but God. The next morning she woke up, and she took my cell phone. So this was back in 2011 when cell phones were like, smartphones were fairly new. And she was really into the show Yo Gabba Gabba at the time. And the first thing she said when she woke up was Gab Gab, which she had never said before. And I was like, very, very taken aback. I was like, did you just say Yo Gabba Gabba? She said, Gab Gab, watch Gab Gab. And, you know, I was just frozen. And I said, Kylie, can you say Jordan? And she said, Jordan. I said, can you say Devin? Can you say Caden? I had her name all her siblings' names. She was full blown talking. Like, she literally drowned, had no oxygen for 5 minutes, never talked, was barely potty trained. And she woke up with a full vocabulary and potty trained within like the week. And it was so surreal. And also she had turned 2 in April, and this was in July, so she was pretty young. About 6 months after this is where the testimony, the bigger part of the testimony comes in my opinion. It's a great testimony that she survived, but the second half of her testimony is that she had an encounter in heaven, and she's on the spectrum, and so for Kylie, I know the spectrum is very big, right? And so for Kylie, she has had a hard time putting her thoughts into words until probably puberty. Like, she struggled to say what she was thinking or articulate words properly. And so bits and pieces of this story came out over a period of like 8 to 10 years. And so it's like every time she would tell us the story, more information would come out. And so I'm going to tell you what has come out over the years. So when she was about 6 months post drowning, also I should preface this with the fact that we had 4 kids in 5 years, and my husband worked crazy hours. I barely went to church. I had gone through some difficult times with church. I had some spiritual abuse. So church, like, I would mention God at home, but my kids didn't know anything about God, and they didn't really attend church. So that's important to know, because 6 months after she drowned, she told us that when she drowned, she said, Jesus played ball. And we're like, what do you mean Jesus played ball? And she told us that when she fell in the pool, Jesus took her home and they played ball. And we were like, that's weird. Like, we didn't push for those details. And she said that, well, we asked her, we said, what did Jesus look like? And she just said he had on a white dress. And that was that. A couple years later, it came out that she told us that it was like she was sitting in a giant room, and more details came out about this much later, but that she was in a giant room and she was stuck in a chair. She had specific details about the carpet and her being frozen and she couldn't move, and Jesus floating and all this kind of stuff. And then when she was about 6, one day, my husband and I were watching this series on Amazon Prime, and at the front of the TV show, it was a Stephen King, like, we should not have been watching this, but regardless, we watched this Stephen King episode series, and at the beginning, I don't know why it was there, but they had a Bible verse from Revelations, and it was the Bible verse that says, and he's called the Word of God, and his robe is dipped in blood. And I was like, that's weird. Why is that even on the TV? But regardless, there was a reason we watched that, because the very next day, Kylie comes to us to talk about her drowning experience again. And she would do this every couple years, out of the blue, talk about it. She was telling us that when she was in the church in heaven, that Jesus was coming towards her in his white dress, and it was red at the bottom. And we were like, my husband and I were like, what is happening right now? She also told us that in the back of that room, there was animals. And, you know, with Kylie, you can ask her questions, but it's almost like she didn't really hear what we were asking her, or she didn't know how to answer them. But now that she's 15, I had a conversation with her about this, probably in the last 6 months, because she became a born-again believer in April. And she was telling me that when she drowned and she was in the church room, and it's actually fascinating because the stories I've heard from other people, this coincides with other things I've heard. But essentially, she was in a room with chairs, and there was so many chairs in this room that in either direction that you looked, the chairs went on for eternity. Like, there was no end to the amount of chairs in this room. And she said at the front of this room, there were angels, and she said they were like taller than buildings, like huge, like ginormous angels. I think she said 30 feet, but she doesn't really know what 30 feet is, but she said they were tall. She said they were taller than trees. So I imagine they were 30 feet roughly or more. And she said Jesus floated towards her. She said, I couldn't move my body, but I could turn my neck and he was just smiling at me. And she says it was so bright that you could almost not see anything. And she had said in the back of this room were doors where the animals were. Now, what's really fascinating is I asked her when she was 12, I said, can you remember like at all, like what the animals were that you saw when you were in heaven? And she sat there and she was just like thinking about it really hard. And just for the record, my kids have only been back in church this year. So what I'm about to tell you, she could not have known. She said that the animals in the back of the church were a lion and a lamb. And honestly, her testimony of what she saw in heaven is almost more powerful than seeing her come back from the dead. Because I see now, I always wondered, Lord, why on earth would you let my child drown? Or why would I have been in that situation to experience that? And this is what I know, is that God allows all things to work for his good. Is it terrible my kid drowned? Yes. Was I traumatized and did I have PTSD and depression? Yes. I was messed up for a long time over this. Crippling anxiety, just absolute despair for years. But what I've come to learn is that had my daughter not drowned and had my daughter not come face to face with Jesus, my husband and I would not be where we are today. My husband and I would have completely walked away from the church, from the Lord completely, because there was a time where I said to God, I don't know if you're real anymore, but I know that you are, because there's no way Kylie could have known the things that she knew. And it has been my daughter's testimony of what happened to her in heaven that has kept me at least believing that there is a God, or that God does exist. Because apart from her testimony, what I had lived and experienced in my own walk as a Christian, I know now that I was expecting people and churches and other things to fill a void in my life that was only meant to be filled by Christ. And when the church let me down, and when man let me down, and when friends and family let me down, instead of me turning to the Lord to fill that spot when those people exited and left me and abandoned me, instead I blamed God for it, which is exactly what the enemy wants us to do. He wants us to blame him for everything that goes wrong in our life. But the truth is, no matter what terrible things happen, God can and he will turn it around for his good. And I do want to say that my daughter was set free from the spirit of death this year. She has been suicidal and depressed and self-loathing and cutting for years. Probably since she was 7. She's been not well mentally. I just wrote it off as it being a side effect of her autism. But you know what? She encountered Jesus and she encountered the Holy Spirit, and we set her free, and we don't have problems with that anymore, because that is the power of God. People don't realize that when people have a near-death experience, in that moment, in that 5-minute window, Satan thought he won. Because what does Satan want to do? He wants to conquer the innocent, and he wants to kill. He wants to kill the innocent and kill children. Like that is his goal, to kill children, among many other things. But in that moment, he won, right? When God thwarted his plan and brought my child back from the dead, he believed that he still had rights over her life in death, and that I believe this, the enemy believes that when someone has a near-death experience, that they have been wronged, and they will get that life. They will do whatever they can to get that life back, because they should have had it. And I see now, when the Lord revealed to me this year that she had a spirit of death, I didn't even know that was a thing, but I learned about that, and I saw that my daughter exhibited every symptom of people who suffer with this. And when my daughter was set free, it was instantaneous. I mean, absolutely instantaneous. Like her whole demeanor just changed. And, she's a new baby believer. She's a new Christian. And so, she still has her struggles, and she's amazing now though, but God is not done with her. And I've been telling her whole life. I said, Kylie, God has a special plan for you. There is no reason that he would bring you back from the dead only for you to fall into suicide, or for you to fall into some sinful lifestyle that is completely reckless. I said, why would he bring you back to life when he could have let you stay dead and just kept your soul in heaven? He has a plan for you. And in what I have discovered, which is another video, I'm sure, if anyone cares, but she has crazy spiritual gifts. This kid literally, I see into the spirit mentally. This child sees into the spirit with her eyes, and I don't have the time to get into that right now in this video because I don't want this to be too long. But the stuff this kid sees, the stuff this kid prays, the stuff this kid understands about the spiritual realm, I can't wait to see what God is going to do in her. But yeah, that's Kylie's testimony of her drowning. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. There is nothing too personal. I am fully healed from this, and it's all been for God's glory. So yeah, just let me know.